Welcome to the emergency episode of Friends on Fire. I'm Mike.
I'm Maggie, and we're Friends on Fire.
And we are on a mission to get friends to talk about money.
Okay, Mike. So we decided it would be a good idea to change up our episode order and record an episode on what is going on in the world right now with coronavirus, the impact it's having on us personally, professionally, and financially.
What I've been noticing around, online and in the office is that everybody's talking to each other about this, not because any person's an expert, but just because it's a trying time and people are looking for answers. And so we might not have the right answers, but we're going to share our thoughts with you and hopefully it'll help.
Yeah, it's definitely monopolizing all conversations with everyone lately. And I don't mean monopolizing in a bad way. It's just there's not much else to talk about but this right now.
Right, especially since all schools in Atlanta are closed, all workplaces are working remotely.
It's interesting. We posted something on social media maybe a week ago, or maybe a little bit more, that was saying that this isn't, it seems like an unprecedented time, but that it's not really. But what's interesting is we were more talking about the financial aspect and the dip in the market and saying, we've had dips like this before. But I think I would change that statement. This does feel like an unprecedented time in our lifetime, at least, in terms of what is happening with the coronavirus and how quickly things are spreading and the adjustments and changes that we're having to make to our lifestyles.
Yeah, I agree. And on top of that, earlier in the week, there was a big oil fiasco with Saudi Arabia and Russia, which sent oil prices plummeting. And so the compounding effect of two global kind of catastrophes is really causing a lot of people to panic. You can see that in the market. When you have, a 1% swing in the market, it's like a pretty big deal. But when you have day after day after day where it's up or down 5 to 10%, that is crazy.
Yeah. I think one thing that's worth noting also is I feel like we've been watching this kind of slowly change over the past couple months. So to some people, this might feel like it popped up overnight, depending on, what type of news they follow and just sort of the circles they run in. For us, I just think it's interesting to note that we both work for a large global travel company, and we have a very large presence in China. So we've been watching this unfold for months now. And I actually had to look it up last night because I couldn't remember. But the first death in China, they discovered this at the end of 2019. And then the first death in China was January 11th. And the numbers quickly grew from there. And so this has really been going on for, a couple to a few months now. And it's hit the United States more recently in the past few weeks, month. We have had some time to kind of mentally adjust to it and realize what was happening. I don't think anyone knew how quickly it would spread or what would happen exactly. It's worth noting that depending on kind of where you are in the change curve of how long you've known about this, how much information you have, you may be at a different point in your kind of mindset of what's happening. Most people in the United States now are realizing this is pretty serious, right? Like there's no reason to freak out or, go crazy, but we do need to start being, significantly more cautious. Schools are closed. Most companies are working remote for any employees that absolutely don't need to be on site at a job. And this is just an incredibly kind of unique and unprecedented time in the world.
But Maggie and I are sitting 6 feet apart.
Yes, we are keeping social distance. We've adjusted our podcast setup to make sure we keep proper distance. Hey, Mike, did you watch the Donald Trump press conference on Friday?
No, I try to avoid all of his press conferences, but I did read some of the snippets.
I usually do. And what's funny is I don't watch a lot of them. So we were both at home, of course. And I was watching it with my husband, and he watches more of them than I do. I really do try to avoid watching the news very often, especially with him.
It's good practice.
But I really, just with what's going on, I was very curious to hear what he had to say and just what was going on. The internet pretty much covered it all, but I was watching the handshaking and I was like, oh my gosh, no, is this actually happening? And then the dude who gave the president of the United States an elbow bump and sort of avoided the handshake, I was like, that's awesome. And he's the first person in that whole group who had, any sense and remembered what was happening in the world. So he's my new hero. I looked up his name. His name's Bruce Greenstein. He's an exec at a big home healthcare company. Anyways, good job, Bruce. Well done.
Let's jump into our thoughts. And first, little disclaimer, as we normally do. We're not doctors. We're not economists. We're not financial advisors. So we're going to share our thoughts about what's going on, as well as our thoughts on the market. But be sure that you're doing research and being conservative about medical and financial decisions.
So before we jump into talking about more around the market and the financial angle of this, we did want to just take a moment to recognize and appreciate how serious and emerging this coronavirus outbreak is across the world right now. I mean, it's literally changing by the day as we get more information. So again, today it's actually Sunday, March 15th in the morning. As we're recording this, like I said, schools are closed in the city we live in, which is Atlanta. Events are canceled. Every major sporting association have canceled their seasons until further notice. All large gatherings are canceled. People are canceling their vacations. And, it's going to significantly adjust our way of life over the coming weeks. I actually wrote a very long blog post on Mostly Minimal Life, which is my blog, about how I'm going to deal with working from home with 2 adults trying to work from home while 3 kids are out of school. And out of school isn't like hang out forever. It's like we actually have to do some e-learning and we need to continue some level of plan and structure and maintain the chaos. And so I was trying to kind of collect my own thoughts on it personally and kind of plan ahead for what the coming weeks are going to look like. So anyways, it might be worth checking out if it's something that sounds interesting to you. I think our point is just, we've got to get in the right mindset and recognize that this is serious. This is going to adjust our way of life for a while. It could be for a few weeks. It could be for a few months. We really don't know. We are just going to have to wait and see how things progress every day and every week. We want everyone to just be safe and be cautious and kind of, think through what they're doing, not just for the impact on yourself, but for the impact it has on others. Because every decision that we make right now actually has as much of an impact on other people around us if we're being irresponsible around, quarantining and being safe and careful about how we spread things around the world right now. But there's 2 social posts that I wanted to call out that I think really just shared a very thoughtful and important perspectives to think about right now, and that are tied to a lot of the things that, we talk about on the show. The first one is from Rich and Regular, and they post about financial independence and personal finance. They actually just launched that just announced that they're going to be writing a book. But they have a very popular blog, and you can follow them on social media too. And so their post was from a few days ago, and it says, "I'm willing to bet that over half of the people I know are the working poor. About 30% middle class, 15% upper middle class, and the remaining 5%, and I'm being generous, are upper class, rich and or financially independent. I've both anticipated and dreaded the period we are entering. Jobs will be lost, homes will be foreclosed on, and families will be crippled. The ripple effect of the coronavirus makes it all worse. All the articles and reports that show the high percentage of people that wouldn't be able to absorb the $500 expense will be validated. Meanwhile, I predict other articles which will highlight that more millionaires were made during this recent boom than any other time in modern human history. If ever there was a time for compassionate leadership, it's now. And that doesn't just go for our elected officials. We are all leaders of our homes and communities, both on and offline. Yes, we should all be responsible with our money, but let's not judge others who will be swallowed up by this, quote, correction. Let's not be so harsh on our coworkers who may be a little bit off their A game. Let's keep in mind that many people haven't fully recovered from the 2008 economic crisis, and now this." So that was what Rich and Regular posted, and I thought it was a great reminder, just perspective that this is going to have a big economic impact, aside from just all of the health and kind of medical realities. This is going to have a big economic negative impact on the most financially vulnerable parts of our society.
And that's the part that I think people are just starting to understand and why the markets are reacting the way they are. It's a good time to give a little bit of context into why the markets are reacting. So markets get jumpy for a few different reasons. And I think surprises, both good and bad, will cause higher than average jumps or drops. So what happened with coronavirus is that a certain industry got hit first. So travel got hit first. So Maggie was talking about how we have hotels in China. So we started hearing about these things much sooner than perhaps the broad community did. And so when a hotel closes, that isn't just lost revenue for the hotel owner. It is lost hourly wages for those employees. It is lost tips from those restaurants. It is lost revenue for the suppliers of the food to those restaurants, of the soap to the hotel rooms. And so you have this sort of domino effect that starts with the people who are essentially working hourly and on tips. And so I'll come back to that thought in a second. But travel as an industry got hit first. And then we started to see the impact of what happens when people stop traveling. Conferences get canceled. So the revenue from those events goes away. Sporting events gets canceled. So the revenue from those events, the TV deals are in question. And so we started to see this impact more and more industries. And that's why the swings started to get more pronounced and more frequent, because people were starting to figure out what the implications of all this were going to be. Coming back to Rich and Regular's post, the people who feel it immediately are not the ones who have big 401ks necessarily, even though they may have seen a big drop in their balances. They're salaried employees. They have very high wages. They will not feel the pain from this immediately.
Well, they think they're feeling pain, which I think is their point. Like they're feeling pain in their own respect.
Yeah, in a different way.
But it's not nearly as crippling as the pain that the average person and the working class are going to see across the world.
Right. So the people who are working in that hotel that hasn't been open for months, they have no money. They may not be able to pay their debts. They start to incur more interest. They may not be able to pay their mortgage. They may get foreclosed upon. This is how things start to snowball and lead to a recession. And I think that is the fear right now, that we don't know if we're going to recover from this in a week or if we are at some sort of tipping point where everything starts to fail, like we saw in 2008.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were talking about that, and just the reference, I was thinking about the Masters. So at Augusta National, so the golf tournament, I hope everyone knows what the Masters is. Use it as an example. You have a group or a class of people who think, oh, that's disappointing. I had Masters tickets. So a neighbor just said that to me earlier. I had Masters tickets. That's a bummer. I can't go this year. I'm like, that's not the problem. That's Rich and Regular's point. That is not the problem. The postponement of the Masters is crippling to the economy of Augusta, Georgia. There are entire businesses that stay in business through that one event every year. And so when that revenue doesn't happen and things they've already invested money into and have costs on, there's tons of hourly workers who aren't going to get paid, don't have jobs, make a lot of money. There's people that rent their houses out in Augusta every year and have already spent that money. There's just all of these. Those are little examples, but they're the food vendors that could go out of business over this. So a lot of small businesses that are kind of not super healthy or run day by day will go out of business as a result of what's going to happen with the economy. And any business that was a little bit vulnerable in the first place, like this could be the item, or this could be the situation that kind of takes them down.
You might be thinking, well, a small business should not go under because of 1 week of lost revenue, or one person shouldn't have their house foreclosed because they lose a week or two of hourly paychecks. But there's two things that I think we need to keep in perspective, is that most people live paycheck to paycheck. And even people who earn quite a bit of money still live paycheck to paycheck. And so the reality of this is that losing 1 week of income or 2 weeks or 8 weeks, as we may be leading to, is a very big deal. The other thing is that as the economy has been growing in this bull market, debt is very cheap. And so people are leveraging themselves dramatically. We see this in consumer debt. We see this in student loan debt. Businesses have a high debt ratio. And so when you stop getting revenue, that puts a lot of pressure on your cash flows, because you have to not only invest in your business and pay your staff and all that sort of stuff, you have to pay down your debt. And so when you don't have the cash to start doing that, you run into a situation where you default. And when you default, that is when businesses go under. And it is unclear at what point that will be. And I think it's going to be different for every small business up through the very largest of companies.
Yeah. Okay, so let me read the second social post because it's a very different perspective. And I love it because it's tied to minimalism and just sort of a little bit of the silver lining of what could come out of this. Not to make light of this not being an incredibly serious situation. This was posted on Instagram by an account called Fire Myself by 40. It was some predictions and some thoughts shared by someone named Lee Edelcourt. We'll provide a link to this in our show notes. She was basically saying coronavirus offers a blank page for a new beginning. And she shared a lot of really interesting thoughts. And it's worth reading the whole article. It's not that long, and it's just got a really interesting perspective. She's a trend forecaster also. And so she talks about the effect of coronavirus on our society habits, and then also the economy at a larger scale. And she makes some statements like, this is not a financial crisis, but a disruption crisis. So she talks about this term that we're entering a quarantine of consumption, which means we're going to quit consuming as much in some categories. And we've given some examples of that already. But she said, where we will learn how to be happy with just a simple dress, rediscovering old favorites we own, reading a forgotten book, and cooking up a storm to make life beautiful. The impact of the virus will be cultural and crucial to building an alternative and profoundly different world. And if you read the article, she talks more about and shares some thoughts more about the idea of this quarantine of consumption, and that, we're all going to be kind of, quote, stuck at home for a few weeks, if not longer. And we're going to, in many ways, need to simplify our lives. Grocery stores there's long lines. We're not going to be able to just go out and get whatever we want any second, any minute. We're going to have to sometimes settle for less and just enjoy the simpler things in life. And these are actually things that Mike and I talk about and already live our lives in this way. So for example, I don't eat out a lot now, so this is not a big change to me, but people are going to end up eating out less. A lot of businesses are going to start closing. Like in Italy and France, they've closed all restaurants. Things like that may start happening more broadly and across the United States. And it will make people have to live more simple and make different choices on how they consume things. Look, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but her point is some good lessons and kind of changes in our habits could come out of this, which I think is a really interesting perspective and was just worth sharing.
After all global catastrophes, wars, pandemics, recessions, there is some good that comes out of it because societies change the way they behave. And so I think we may be seeing some of that. I read an interesting article about how this could jumpstart the working remote phase in kind of global culture. So companies are now being put to the test. Can they function well? How do they figure out how to do it? Because they have no choice. Yeah.
What if we function better? That would be interesting, right?
Yeah, but we would. That means we get to hang out less during the day. Let's talk about money.
Yeah, let's jump into the financial angle on this. I think we wanted to give appropriate time to the broader societal impact that this is going to have, and will, continue to unfold and change by the day. But since this is a personal finance podcast, let's talk about the financial angle, which means you're going to start hearing more from Mike.
All right, so we posted on Facebook last night asking what people wanted to hear in this episode, and somebody said there was a couple good comments. Somebody said, please reassure people not to panic. Don't make any major moves with your money unless you have the cash and want to invest it in something that's down that will go up. Investing is for the long haul. Don't freak out about your 401k, and don't overbuy toilet paper.
Were those all from the same person?
This is all one comment. Lots of advice. This is from Matt. Look out for the elderly during this time. Make sure your parents or grandparents have what they need, and enjoy some extra family time.
Yeah, that's great.
And then another related question, and I'm going to tie these two together, is that are you changing anything with your investments now that we are in such a sharp downturn? Is there anything you will do differently for the future if you believe that we're heading into a recession? And I think the important thing is that you can't panic. But panicking is not the same as pausing and making mindful decisions about where you think your risk is or where you think the market's going to go. So yes, investing is for the long term. You don't want to freak out. You don't want to panic. But we need to be mindful of the trends that we're seeing. And so I personally believe that there is very little upside to be had in the near term.
In the market.
And a ton of downside.
So you think we've not hit the bottom yet?
I don't think we've hit the bottom yet. We were talking in a recent episode about our 2020 goals check-in and our investment challenge. And I had bought Boeing after it took a pretty significant drop because there's a lot of pressure on the company with the 737 MAX. And I thought this is a great buying opportunity. Market then dropped. Airlines.
Boeing was not a good idea.
Boeing has dropped something like 60%. And I had picked it up after it was down like 30%, but it dropped another 20 or 30%. I eventually just stopped looking at it. But airlines and Boeing got hit really hard. And I was starting to buy back in. I actually bought more Boeing. I could take the mindset like these are retirement accounts. I'm in it for the long haul. I'm sure Boeing and airline companies will go back up eventually. But then I have to pause and ask myself, are there going to be more travel restrictions? So Trump said that he's cutting off travel between Europe and the US. And now we just found out that the UK and Ireland are included in that as well. Could it be South America? Could it be
domestic?
Could it be Africa?
Eventually.
Could it be domestic? I mean, it is unlikely that the travel ban is going to be lifted in a week and airlines are going to return to normal. It is more likely that all of this stuff is going to continue and expand and become more serious. And so I took a serious loss on these airline and airline manufacturing companies because I wasn't panicking, but I realized that I had made a mistake. I had thought this was going to be a temporary overreaction based on panic, and it wasn't panic induced. Well, I think it was partially panic induced, but these are very real implications to these companies. And so I got out of those investments, which I now consider to be a little bit riskier. So going back to this comment, what are you doing with your investment accounts? A panic move would be
I thought that was a question to me at first, and I was like, I don't know. I just ask you what to do.
And not all of my advice works out. You've lost some money.
Thank goodness I didn't follow your Boeing advice. I stay away from individual stock buys, so
yeah. Now it looks like you're an investment genius.
I know, right?
Also, you sometimes forget to take some of my advice.
Yeah, it'll just. I was like, I was busy. I didn't even notice that text.
Right. Certainly, don't freak out and sell everything. It is unclear what's going to happen. We could have a 10% rebound tomorrow and a 10% rebound the next day, and maybe things flatten out and we recover. But I don't think that's where we're headed. And so I am of the mindset that I will be following the news closely as travel restrictions get more serious, as you start to hear news about what different companies are feeling as far as the financial impacts. I'm going to slowly start getting out of the market more, but I'm not going to get out entirely, because what you don't want to do is sell 100% of your investments. The market goes up 20%. You're like, oh my God, I missed it. You get back in and then it drops 10%. And all of a sudden you have mistimed the market.
Which is why everyone says you should not try to time the market.
Right.
The average person should not try to time the market.
Right.
Which is me.
And timing the market, in my mind, is more about kind of short-term timing. Don't try to, stock goes up 2% just on a normal trading day. Don't sell it. Don't buy it when it drops 2%. You need to have a somewhat longer-term horizon. But this is a very unique time. Recessions, if we're heading into one, and it seems like we are, the indicators would say that this is a much more serious financial impact than just kind of a bad quarterly earnings result.
Mm-hmm. Mike, I think it's worth, you talked about this earlier a bit, but I think it's worth just revisiting, explaining to people why this is happening, why the market is down right now.
So when we look at hotel, cruise ship, and airline industries who have been hit first and most significantly, it's because that their business has slowed and in some cases stopped. And it could have just been isolated to hotels and the small businesses and companies that support those hotels. And then it became airlines. All of these companies have workforces. If they lose too much revenue, they don't have the cash flow to pay their employees. And so employees start getting laid off or asked to
take unpaid time off.
Which Delta, I've heard, has done this, is requesting people to take unpaid time off. And then those people who don't have money then don't put it back into the economy. We have a consumer economy, which means that it is driven by people buying things. And if people don't have jobs and they don't have money and they're not buying things, then all of a sudden Targets and Amazon, those companies start to lose money. And the companies who are selling their products through Target and Amazon start to lose money. And that's what is happening to the market. People are starting to see the implications of a lockdown in travel and an isolation of people.
So what do you think's going to happen next?
I think we are in for more bad news. I think everybody would agree that things are going to get worse before they get better.
Yeah, I
That
agree.
doesn't necessarily mean that the market will get worse. However, I think it does mean that. And this is where this is all just still a guessing game. All investors are doing their best to think about what's going to happen, but you can never really tell with the market.
So, Mike, I was trying to compare this to the recession of 2008 and the housing crisis yesterday with my husband. You would have probably laughed at the conversation because I was trying to make a comparison to say, and I'm curious if you agree with this, but I was comparing it to say that was a fundamental problem in our financial system, right? Like bad things were happening tied to how we were pricing mortgages, and I don't even know how to explain it. Anyways, bad things were happening. Versus this is a hopefully temporary, I mean, it may be more than a couple weeks, but a hopefully temporary impact. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with our economy. There's an outbreak happening that is causing people to spend less and causing the markets to get jumpy and all these other things. And so my comment or sort of point of view was that means we should recover much quickly and differently than we did in 2008. Like, do you think that's true?
Maybe, maybe not.
Okay.
So
Super
there's
helpful.
a great,
Just kidding.
I'll get to an
Okay.
answer. There's a great article that I read from Vox about how all recessions are different. But in hindsight, they all could have been easily preventable. And yes, you're right. There was structural problems that we had with our financial system in 2008, which led to this collapse. But what happened was, and the way it's similar here, is that there is still a lot of debt out in the market. People are highly leveraged, and we still have, like we did in 2008, a consumer economy. So if consumer sentiment and risk tolerance is down and people are spending less money, if people are losing their jobs and have high debt to income or debt to equity ratios, then you start to have a lot of the same problems. People spend less, people start to default on their debt, businesses start to close, industries start to fail. It started from a different reason, but has sort of similar results.
Could have, yeah. That's interesting.
And this could end up lasting a very long time, or it could end up being solved within a week. It's, we're going to look back on this in 6 months and be like, oh yeah, should have saw this coming. But
Yeah.
right now we're like, I don't know.
Which is why everybody should stay home and quarantine and be
Right.
very responsible and respectful of the seriousness of this.
Yeah.
Because we actually can control it. And there's a lot of research that says we can control it if we make good decisions. And how we control the outbreak of coronavirus will have an impact on the economy. Okay, so I know we've said a lot of things throughout this episode, but let's get really clear with people. What should people do with their money right now?
Don't make panic-induced decisions.
Do not freak out.
Do not freak out.
Stay calm.
Stay calm. You can decide that you are going to ride it out. You may have all of your investments in retirement accounts, and you're not going to touch it for 20 or 30 years, and you may decide, I'm okay with that. Don't then, in a month, when the market has fallen another 30%,
Which it
sell everything.
Yeah.
You need to be mindful and come up with a plan for what you're going to do. So if you decide you're not going to ride it out and you think there may be more risk or you think there may be more upside, outline, perhaps on paper, what you want to do. S&P is going to drop to a certain level, you're going to put another 10% of your cash back in, or you're going to take 10% of your cash back out. Do it in methodical and logical steps so that you don't run the risk of gambling with your money or making a panic decision.
Yeah, and then, I mean, one thing we haven't talked a lot about is, well, I'm actually buying more right now, right? I mean, I'm probably not buying at the bottom, which isn't perfect, but I am buying at a discount from where it will be when it, goes back up, which could be years from now. Many people are using this as an opportunity that if you have the cash available, now is a good time to buy, or now may be a good time to buy.
And it may be a good time for certain companies and certain industries.
Well, I'm even just talking about general index funds.
The way that you can think about stock buying and selling is that every day you hold something, you are buying it again because you think that there is more upside. And it goes back to my comment.
You should maybe say that again.
So every day you are holding a stock, you are making the decision to buy it again.
That's an interesting way to think about it. I would not say I thought about it. It's a very fair point. I don't think about it that way.
So for some of my broader index funds and my REITs, I have not sold those yet. For the airlines and Boeing, as I mentioned, I have sold those because I would not buy them right now. I think they're going to keep going down, but who knows?
But would you say, as a general rule, if you're primarily investing in index funds and just following the market, like following the S&P 500, that those, if it was your money, you would ride it out and or keep buying into it as things continue to decline if you have the money and can afford to, versus individual stocks are mainly where you're talking about making certain decisions.
Or index funds for particular industries.
Categories, right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
I think it depends on your risk tolerance. The stock market will go back up within the next year. It could be back up to where it was, another 20%. It could go down 30 or 50%. Are you okay with that sort of loss? That's the risk that you run if we enter a major recession. It's all about your risk tolerance. Yes, it will go back up eventually. Are you prepared to go lose?
Can you stomach it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one question that I ask Mike questions about this stuff like incessantly all day. Like, what should I do with this? What should I do with this? One thing that I asked him this morning when we were just chatting before we started recording this was, do you fundamentally believe 5 years from now, all this stuff will be way back up and have strong growth? And you said yes. And so if you believe that, and I believe that too, especially because you said yes, but I kind of believed it anyways, then you don't need to be freaking out and trying to decide what to sell and what to keep and all of that, especially if you're in index funds and just, sort of typical mutual funds or index funds versus buying individual stocks or individual industries of stocks.
But if you do decide to make a change, if you have certain investments which you are not confident in right now, and you want to sell them, or you think you found a great buying opportunity and want to buy, don't beat yourself up over the decision if it's wrong.
Yeah.
And don't congratulate yourself too much if it's right and get overconfident so that you keep buying back in when it's no longer a good opportunity or selling when you've actually hit the bottom. So again, don't panic. Don't get overconfident. Try to be as objective and logical as you can. In a very trying time.
And think long term if you can afford to.
Right. So this has been kind of a just rambling episode about our thoughts. People have been asking us about it. We've been talking to other people about it. So we just thought it'd be helpful to share how we are approaching this, both financially and personally.
So let's cover some key takeaways from this discussion in this episode.
All right. So the first thing that everybody needs to understand is that right now, and certainly if we enter a recession, the most financially vulnerable and the working class are going to be hit first and hit hardest by what's happening now, and significantly so if we enter a recession.
I also think tied to that, there's a huge opportunity for sensitivity and empathy tied to the fact that many people listening to this may be in a stronger financial situation than many people who are going to be impacted here. And just thinking about how you can help someone who may be in need, how you can help in your community or from afar. You've heard so many calls lately to sort of call outs to people too of how you help the elderly and people that are going to be hit more, not just financially by this, but just hit more in terms of the impact it's going to have on them. We do just urge people to recognize that, be sensitive to it, and then also think about how you might be able to help.
And number 2, don't panic buy or panic sell. Don't get too excited if you make a bet and it wins. Don't beat yourself up too much if you make a bet and you lose. So don't gamble. And I think this is worth saying again. Don't gamble with your money. Make mindful, logical decisions as best you can.
Number 3, and we didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but I actually think it's one of the most important, is use this as a time to get financially fit. It is more important now than ever. And one of the things that makes us more confident going into a tough time like this is the way that we've led our lives for the past 10 to 20 years. No matter where you are on the scale of kind of being financially fit today, this can be a really big opportunity and a bit of a kick in the butt, perhaps even, to think about how financially fit you are and how you're spending your money and what your consumption habits are, because we're all going to get hit in different ways and at kind of different scales through this, again, financially and just in many other ways in terms of the impact it's going to have on our lives over the coming weeks and months. And control the stuff you can control. And one of the things you can control is how much money you're spending.
So hopefully this was helpful just to hear some other perspectives on this. But let's wrap this up. If you have any questions or comments, you can always give us a call or text us at 404-981-3370. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll play it on the air.
Also, you can follow us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, etc. There's links to that on our website. You can also join our private Facebook group where we get into more detailed discussions on things like the coronavirus impact and just answer questions in more detail from some of our listeners and followers. And if you're interested in joining that private Facebook group, we'll put a link in the show notes, or you can also reach out to us on any social media and we'll get back to you to join.
You can also find us at friendsonfire.org if you want to check out the latest episodes or get in touch with us.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Maggie.
Bye.
Bye. Can I have some hand sanitizer?